Today's lesson is a variation on the tick mark exercise. You're going to be selecting an impressionist painting to copycat. So you're basically taking that painting, it's in a postcard size, and you're actually recreating it to that exact size, so postcard size, on your tick mark paper. We're looking at impressionists specifically because they used to paint in that tick mark patterning, so dabs of paint done in various different directions. So it's going to help strengthen us as artists to try and do a reproduction. The first step was taking a pencil, or in my case, I took a white color pencil to outline my postcard so I had that frame, that exact measurement for the postcard. The next step you're seeing me do up here, which is to color match. So I'm mixing on my palette, and then I hold up a palette knife to the area I'm trying to recreate. Typically, I'll try and match about 5 colors or values at a time before the paint dries, and then I'll go back to my palette and mix again with the palette knife. And I hold my palette knife up to the area I'm trying to match, but I close one eye when I'm doing that just to isolate the color. So I'm going to start with the sky because that's what you typically do in a landscape. You begin with the sky first. And I am actually doing a little rough outline with some of the sky color that I pre-mixed. So I'm trying to outline where the edge of the trees would go. So you saw that Monet that I'm looking at. That was my reference. And I'm going to be working on the sky right now. And I always start off at the top of a sky. And skies are almost always going to have a gradient. Another way of saying gradient is ombre. So I've pre-mixed those colors, I've color matched, holding up my palette knife to the actual postcard, and now I'm going in and painting it. The goal with painting it is you want to try and replicate the artist's style. So in my case, it's Monet, so I'm trying to replicate his brushwork, which is very similar to tick marks, although because it's a sky, I'm having to use shorter strokes than I did in other places on that paper. The parts of the sky that are left uncovered are actually intentional. That's supposed to be where the clouds are going to go. So my method for painting a sky with clouds is to paint around the clouds. So I'll paint the sky color and then I'll leave a gap and then I'll fill in the cloud color. The reason why is because I want my clouds to be bright and have some vibrancy. So if I went in there and painted a sky first and then painted the clouds on top of the sky, it would mean flatter clouds. And I'm always trying to push for volume and to get some color variations in there. You can see that the gradient's happening. So it's darker on the top, has a little bit of violet added to it, and then as it goes down, it becomes paler, so more white, but also more yellow, and I put in a hint of pink and some peaches too, peach color. Now I'm going to go in with a different brush with a lighter value for the clouds. So I have two brushes there, one that I use for the sky, a second one that I use for the clouds because I wanted the clouds to be a little bit lighter, and if I used the brush that had the blue sky on it, I couldn't get that as light as I wanted to without washing the brush. Most landscape painters paint from the background to the middle ground and then to the foreground. So here I'm in the middle ground background area, and where the sky meets the earth, which is the horizon line, that is where I'm working right now, which is the blue hills. The reason the hills are blue is because they're so far away from the eye that they're taking on a lot of the color of the sky. So it's turning kind of a desaturated blue, but it's still a really rich blue. The next part's a little bit harder because there's about 5 to 7 trees and shrubs too. So I'm going to simplify what I see and try and get down the major shapes, so the major tree shapes. But I am looking at things like negative space. That's the empty space surrounding an object. So if I'm looking at a tree, I'll look at the negative space too to help me determine the placement of the tree and the shape of the negative space in relationship to the next object. If there are forms in your painting, which is just another word of saying three-dimensional object, if there's forms in your painting, you always have to be aware of the light side and the shadow side. And then there's midtone in between the light and the shadow, right? So you want to look for that in your postcard. Typically what happens to one form in your postcard will happen to all of them. For instance, the left side of one of the trees was in shadow, and then I compared that to all the other trees, and every tree had a shadow on the left side due to the lighting. Okay, so now I'm moving into the foreground area, which is warmer than the middle tone or the background. So it's got some kind of yellow greens and reds. It looks like it's a poppy field in bloom. One thing that would be good for you guys to try is to replicate the actual brushwork that the artist used. You may have to slide the postcard out of its sleeve so you can kind of zoom in with your eye up close. Ask yourself, what stroke is that artist using? Are they using a vertical, a horizontal, a curvy, a diagonal, an X pattern? Like, what kind of stroke are they using? How does that stroke compare to the length of other strokes throughout the piece? So you want to figure out, like, how long do I make that stroke? How are they doing certain things? It will help you to understand like how to paint. It'll give you another method of how to lay down paint and how to wrap that stroke around the form to suggest 3D like quality, like volume. Here's what my work looks like at this point. So it's with one layer on. It's still a little bit tricky to see everything because there's still remnants of the former painting underneath, so all of the tick marks. That's why I'm going to suggest that you put a second coat on this. You'll be happier with it. With acrylic paint, it oftentimes looks much better with a second coat anyway. It becomes more solid looking and you can adjust things and make corrections. So this next few minutes, you're going to see me put a second coat and you're going to watch the painting as it changes. Just like previously, I start with the sky first and I really tell myself to make sure it's a gradient. Make sure to ombre down. So in the corners, top right and top left corner, it's darker than in the center. And then it gets progressively lighter as it goes down to the horizon line. And you can see in some places I'm putting on three coats. I'm just like layering it up. And it starts to look more and more like a landscape. The more paint application, the more refinement you do, the more you take your time, breathe, relax while you're doing it, it'll start to look more and more like the painting. It's okay if it doesn't look exactly like the master painting. The goal with this assignment is that you get practice with color mixing. You use tick marks to actually make something that's representational, something we can tell what it's a picture of. It's also good to familiarize yourself with how the Impressionists used to paint. In fact, their way of applying paint is still popular today. So there are still contemporary impressionists out there working. So here's what my painting looks like at the finished stage. I'm going to back out so you can see what it looks like against all those tick marks. So you can see I didn't even center it. You don't have to. It can be anywhere placed within that frame. And then it's kind of cool to see all the tick marks surrounding it.